The telegram arrived on a Thursday morning in September of 1882, and when Helena Ortega opened it with trembling fingers, she knew her life in San Francisco would soon become nothing more than a memory she would try not to think about too often. The words were simple and direct, just like the man who had sent them, or at least that was what her father had told her before he died 3 months earlier. William Thornton of Stockton, California, was expecting her arrival by the end of the month, and he had arranged for transportation and an escort to ensure she arrived safely at his ranch. The marriage contract her father had signed 2 years prior would be honored, despite his passing, and Helena would become Mrs. Thornton whether she wanted to or not. Her mother had been clear about that. There was no money left, no other options, and no room for romantic notions about love or choice. Helena stood in the small apartment she had shared with her parents, looking at the few possessions she could bring with her, and wondered what kind of man would agree to marry a woman he had never met. She was 20 years old, reasonably pretty according to her mother, and completely terrified of what awaited her in Stockton. The town was only about 80 miles away, but it might as well have been on the other side of the world. 2 days later, a tall man with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of storm clouds knocked on her door. He held his hat in his hands and introduced himself as Garrett Fletcher, a ranch hand who worked for Mr. Thornton and had been sent to fetch his future bride. Helena noticed immediately that he could not quite meet her eyes when he spoke, and there was something gentle in his voice that contradicted the rough exterior of dust-covered clothes and calloused hands. "Madam, I have a wagon ready whenever you are prepared to leave," Garrett said, still looking somewhere past her shoulder. "Mr. Thornton wanted to make sure you had a comfortable journey, so I brought extra blankets and provisions for the road. We will need to stay one night along the way, but I assure you that I will make camp at a respectful distance and ensure your safety and reputation remain intact." Helena's mother appeared behind her, her face pinched with worry and relief. "Thank you, Mr. Fletcher. My daughter will be ready within the hour. Please, would you like some coffee while you wait?" Garrett finally looked up, and for a brief moment his eyes met Helena's. She saw something flicker there, a flash of sympathy perhaps, or maybe just curiosity. "That would be kind, madam. Thank you." He sat at their small table while Helena finished packing her trunk, and she could hear her mother chattering nervously about the weather and the journey, and how grateful they were that Mr. Thornton was such a generous man. Garrett responded with polite, short answers, and Helena got the impression that he was not accustomed to being fussed over. When everything was finally loaded into the wagon, Helena embraced her mother one last time. There were tears, of course, and whispered words of advice about being a good wife and making the best of her situation. Helena wanted to scream that she did not want this, that she was terrified and angry and heartbroken all at once. But instead, she simply nodded and climbed up onto the wagon seat beside Garrett Fletcher. The city fell away behind them as the horses pulled the wagon south, and Helena watched everything familiar disappear into the distance. Garrett did not speak much at first, seemingly content to let the silence stretch between them. Helena was grateful for that. She did not think she could manage polite conversation when her entire future was being determined by a contract she had never agreed to and a man she had never chosen. It was not until they had been traveling for several hours that Garrett finally broke the silence. "I apologize if this situation is difficult for you, Miss Ortega. I know it cannot be easy to leave your home and family under these circumstances." Helena turned to look at him, surprised by the genuine concern in his voice. "You do not need to apologize, Mr. Fletcher. You are simply doing your job. This is not your fault." He was quiet for a moment, his hands steady on the reins. "Perhaps not, but that does not make it right. A woman should have a choice in who she marries." "That is a rather progressive opinion for a ranch hand in 1882, Helena said, and she heard the edge in her own voice. Garrett's mouth quirked slightly, not quite a smile, but close to it. "My mother raised me to believe that women are just as capable of making decisions as men. She ran our family farm after my father died, and she did not need any man to tell her how to do it." "Where is she now?" Helena asked, finding herself genuinely curious despite her misery. "She passed away 2 years ago. Fever took her quickly. After that, I sold the farm and started working for Mr. Thornton. Did not see much point in trying to run it alone." "I am sorry for your loss," Helena said softly. Garrett nodded, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "Thank you, and I am sorry for yours as well. Your mother mentioned that your father passed recently." They fell into a more comfortable silence after that, and Helena found herself stealing glances at the man beside her. He was probably around 25 or 26, with dark hair that needed a trim and a strong jawline covered in a few days' worth of stubble. His hands were large and capable, and there was something reassuring about the way he handled the horses with such easy confidence. She wondered what he thought of this entire arrangement, whether he pitied her or simply did not care one way or another. As the afternoon wore on, the landscape changed from the busy outskirts of San Francisco to rolling hills dotted with oak trees. Garrett pointed out landmarks along the way, telling her stories about the area in a low, pleasant voice that made the journey feel less daunting. He told her about the gold rush days, about the ranches that had sprung up in the decades since, about the hard work and harsh conditions that made the Central Valley both beautiful and unforgiving. "Mr. Thornton has a good spread," Garrett said, as the sun began to dip toward the horizon. "Cattle mostly, some horses. He is a fair employer, pays on time, does not work his men to death. You could do worse." Helena heard what he was not saying, the careful neutrality in his words. "But I could also do better." Garrett was quiet for a long moment. "I do not know Mr. Thornton well enough to say what kind of husband he will be. He keeps to himself mostly. He is 15 years older than you, widowed 5 years ago. His first wife died in childbirth, along with the baby. He has not been the same since, according to the other ranch hands who have been there longer than I have." Helena absorbed this information, trying to imagine her future husband and failing. "Thank you for telling me. It helps to know something about him, even if it is not particularly comforting." "He is not cruel," Garrett added quickly. "I have never seen him mistreat anyone or anything. He is just closed off, I suppose, distant." They made camp that evening near a small creek, and true to his word, Garrett set up Helena's bedroll on one side of a large oak tree while he made his own camp on the opposite side. He cooked beans and bacon over the fire and served her a plate with careful courtesy, never once making her feel uncomfortable or threatened. After they ate, he excused himself to check on the horses, giving her privacy to prepare for sleep. Helena lay in her bedroll, staring up at the stars through the branches of the oak tree, and listened to the sound of Garrett moving around the camp. She heard him talking softly to the horses, heard the crackle of the fire as he added more wood, and felt an unexpected sense of safety despite the strangeness of the situation. There was something inherently trustworthy about Garrett Fletcher, something that made her believe he would keep his word about protecting her. She must have dozed off eventually, because she woke to the smell of coffee brewing and the pale light of dawn filtering through the trees. Garrett was already up, moving efficiently around the camp as he prepared breakfast and packed up their supplies. When he noticed she was awake, he poured her a cup of coffee and handed it to her with a slight nod. "We should reach Stockton by early afternoon if we make good time," he said. "The road gets a bit rougher from here, but the wagon can handle it." Helena sipped the coffee, which was strong and bitter but warmed her from the inside. "Mr. Fletcher, may I ask you something?" "Of course, Miss Ortega. Why did you agree to come fetch me?" "Surely Mr. Thornton has other ranch hands he could have sent." Garrett crouched down to roll up his bedroll, his movements deliberate and slow. "He asked me specifically. Said he wanted someone he could trust to treat you with respect and get you there safely. I suppose he thought I was a decent choice." "And are you?" "A decent choice, I mean." He looked up at her then, and their eyes met fully for the first time since they had left San Francisco. "I like to think so, madam. My mother raised me right, and I have never been one to take advantage of someone in a vulnerable position. You can trust me to see you safely to Mr. Thornton's ranch, and you can trust that I will not speak a word of anything you might say or do on this journey. Your reputation is safe with me." Helena believed him. There was no reason not to. "Thank you, Mr. Fletcher. That means more than you might realize." They were back on the road within the hour, and as they traveled, Helena found herself talking more freely than she had expected. Perhaps it was the knowledge that Garrett was essentially a stranger who would deliver her to her fate and then disappear from her life. Or perhaps it was simply that he was easy to talk to. But she told him about her childhood in San Francisco, about her father's business failures that had led to their financial ruin, about her mother's increasing desperation after he died. Garrett listened without judgment, occasionally asking questions but mostly just letting her talk. In return, he told her more about his own life, about growing up on a small farm in Northern California, about learning to break horses from his father, and learning to read from his mother. He had a gift for storytelling, painting pictures with his words that made Helena almost forget where they were going and why. "You enjoy working on Mr. Thornton's ranch?" she asked, as the landscape began to flatten out and they entered the valley proper. "It is honest work," Garrett said carefully. "The pay is decent, and like I said, Mr. Thornton is fair, but I do not plan to be a ranch hand forever. I have been saving my wages, hoping to buy my own piece of land eventually. Nothing fancy, just enough to run some cattle and maybe grow some crops, build a life that belongs to me." "That sounds like a good dream," Helena said, and she meant it. She envied him the possibility of choice, the freedom to decide his own future. Garrett glanced at her, and something unreadable crossed his face. "Everyone deserves the chance to build the life they want, Miss Ortega. I am sorry that you are not getting that chance." Helena felt tears prick at her eyes, and she blinked them away quickly. "Life is not always fair, Mr. Fletcher. I learned that lesson when my father died and left us with nothing but debts and a marriage contract he had signed away my future with." "No," Garrett agreed quietly. "Life is not always fair. But that does not mean we should accept injustice without fighting against it. And what would you have me do? Run away? Break the contract and leave my mother destitute? I have no money, no prospects, no way to support myself. Marriage to Mr. Thornton is the only option I have, whether I like it or not." Garrett was silent for a long time, his jaw tight. Finally, he said, "You are right, of course. I apologize for speaking out of turn. It is not my place to question your choices or your circumstances." But Helena noticed that his hands had tightened on the reins, and there was tension in his shoulders that had not been there before. She found herself studying his profile, the strong lines of his face, the way his hair curled slightly at his collar. He was handsome in a rough, unpolished way, and there was a kindness in him that she suspected was rare among men in this harsh country. They stopped briefly at midday to rest the horses and eat some of the provisions Garrett had packed. He spread a blanket on the ground for Helena to sit on while he tended to the animals, and she watched him work with efficient, practiced movements. There was grace in the way he moved, despite his size, and she found herself wondering what it would be like to be married to a man like Garrett Fletcher instead of William Thornton. The thought came unbidden and unwelcome, and Helena pushed it away quickly. There was no point in torturing herself with impossible fantasies. Garrett was her escort, nothing more, and in a few hours she would be at Mr. Thornton's ranch preparing to become his wife. Whatever attraction she might feel toward the cowboy who had been sent to fetch her was irrelevant and dangerous. But as they resumed their journey and the afternoon sun beat down on them, Helena could not quite shake the awareness of the man beside her. She noticed the way his voice softened when he spoke to her, the way he made sure she was comfortable and had enough water, the way he looked at her when he thought she was not paying attention. There was something in those looks, something that made her heart beat a little faster and her stomach flutter nervously. Stockton came into view in the early afternoon, exactly as Garrett had predicted. It was a bustling town, much busier than Helena had expected, with wide streets and false-fronted buildings that spoke of prosperity and growth. The gold rush might have been long over, but the valley was thriving on agriculture and ranching now, and it showed in the activity on the streets. Garrett guided the wagon through town with the easy familiarity of someone who knew the area well. People called out greetings to him, and he responded with waves or brief exchanges. Helena noticed several women watching them pass with curious expressions, and she wondered what they must think of her, this stranger being brought to marry William Thornton. They continued past the town, following a road that led out into the countryside. After another hour of travel, Garrett turned the wagon onto a long drive lined with fence posts. In the distance, Helena could see a large ranch house and several outbuildings, all well-maintained and prosperous-looking. "This is it," Garrett said quietly. "Mr. Thornton's ranch." Helena's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. This was real now, no longer some abstract future but a concrete present that she had to face. She gripped the edge of the wagon seat, trying to steady her breathing. Garrett reached over and gently placed his hand over hers. The touch was brief, just a moment of contact, but it sent a shock through her entire body. "You are stronger than you think, Miss Ortega. You will survive this." Before she could respond, he withdrew his hand and urged the horses forward. They pulled up in front of the ranch house, and a man stepped out onto the porch. He was tall and lean, with iron-gray hair and a weathered face that might have been handsome once, but was now marked by lines of sorrow and hardship. He wore clean but plain clothes, and his expression was carefully neutral as he watched them approach. William Thornton, Helena thought. Her future husband. Garrett climbed down from the wagon and then turned to help Helena down. His hands were gentle on her waist, and he held her gaze for just a second longer than necessary. "Be brave," he whispered, so quietly that only she could hear. Then he released her and turned to Mr. Thornton. "Sir, I have brought Miss Ortega as you requested." The journey was uneventful, and she as well. William Thornton nodded and walked down the porch steps. He stopped a few feet away from Helena, looking her over with an assessing gaze that made her feel like a piece of livestock being evaluated. "Miss Ortega, welcome to my ranch." "I trust the journey was not too difficult." Helena found her voice somehow. "No, sir. Mr. Fletcher was an excellent escort. He ensured my comfort and safety throughout." Thornton glanced at Garrett briefly. "Good. Fletcher, have one of the other men unload Miss Ortega's belongings and take them to the house. You can get back to your regular duties." There was a clear dismissal in his tone, and Helena felt a sudden surge of panic. She did not want Garrett to leave, not yet, not when he was the only familiar thing in this strange new world. But Garrett simply nodded, his face impassive. "Yes, sir. Miss Ortega, it was an honor to escort you." He tipped his hat to her, and for just a moment their eyes met again. Helena saw regret there and something else she could not quite name. Then he was gone, leading the wagon toward the barn and calling out to someone Helena could not see. She watched him go, feeling suddenly and completely alone. "Come inside," Thornton said, not unkindly but without warmth either. "I will show you to your room. We have much to discuss about the wedding arrangements." Helena followed him into the house, which was large and well-furnished but had an air of emptiness about it, as if no one truly lived there. Thornton showed her to a bedroom on the second floor, which was clean and comfortable but impersonal. He stood in the doorway, not entering, and regarded her with that same assessing look. "The wedding will be in 3 days," he said. "I have arranged for the minister to come here. It will be a simple ceremony, just the necessary witnesses. I see no point in making a spectacle of it. After we are married, you will manage the household and oversee the domestic staff. I expect you to be competent and efficient. In return, you will have a comfortable home and financial security." "I trust that is acceptable." Helena swallowed hard. "Yes, sir. I will not pretend this is a love match, Miss Ortega. My first marriage was one of affection, and when I lost my wife, I lost any desire for that kind of emotional entanglement again. This arrangement is practical for both of us. Your father's contract provided financial support for your mother, which I have already begun providing, and it gives me a wife to manage my household. We both get what we need. Do you understand?" "I understand," Helena said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Good. Dinner is at 6. I expect you to join me. We should become somewhat acquainted before the wedding, even if this is primarily a business arrangement." He left then, closing the door behind him, and Helena sank down onto the bed. Her hands were shaking, and she felt cold despite the warmth of the afternoon. This was her future. This cold, practical arrangement with a man who had made it clear he wanted nothing more than a housekeeper he could call his wife. She thought of Garrett Fletcher, of his gentle voice and kind eyes, of the way his hand had felt covering hers in that brief moment of contact. Then she pushed the thought away angrily. She could not afford to indulge in fantasies about a cowboy who had simply been doing his job. She had to focus on surviving, on making the best of the situation she had been forced into. The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparations and uncomfortable meals with William Thornton. He was not cruel, but he was distant and formal, treating Helena more like a new employee than a future wife. He explained his expectations for managing the household, introduced her to the cook and housekeeper, who would be working under her direction, and showed her around the ranch with the same detached efficiency he might use to show a buyer his cattle. Helena saw Garrett a few times during those 3 days, always at a distance. He was working with the other ranch hands, breaking horses or mending fences or doing whatever tasks Thornton assigned. Once, their eyes met across the yard, and Helena felt that same flutter in her stomach, that same impossible longing for something she could not have. Garrett looked away quickly, his jaw tight, and Helena forced herself to do the same. The wedding day arrived with clear skies and warm sunshine, mocking Helena's internal misery. The minister arrived in the late morning, along with 2 of Thornton's neighbors who would serve as witnesses. Helena wore a simple dress that the housekeeper had helped her alter to fit properly, nothing special or beautiful, just serviceable. There were no flowers, no celebration, no joy. The ceremony took place in Thornton's parlor and lasted less than 15 minutes. Helena spoke her vows in a steady voice, determined not to show any weakness or emotion. Thornton did the same, his face impassive. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Thornton gave Helena a brief, perfunctory kiss on the cheek and then turned to shake hands with the witnesses. It was done. She was Mrs. William Thornton now, bound to this man and this life by legal and religious ties she could not break. The witnesses stayed for a meal that the cook had prepared, and Helena played the role of hostess with mechanical efficiency. She smiled when appropriate, made polite conversation, and pretended that everything was fine. All the while, she felt as if she was watching someone else live her life, as if her real self was somewhere far away, safe from this reality. After the guests left, Thornton told her he had business to attend to in town and would be gone until evening. He left without ceremony, and Helena found herself alone in the big house with nothing to do and no purpose. She wandered from room to room, trying to imagine herself living here for the rest of her life, and felt a crushing weight of despair settle over her. She could not stay inside any longer. She needed air, needed space, needed something to make her feel less trapped. Helena changed into a simpler dress and ventured outside, walking aimlessly around the ranch property. She found herself drawn toward the corrals, where she could hear the sounds of horses and men working. Garrett was there, along with two other ranch hands, working with a young stallion that was clearly unhappy about being confined. Helena stayed back, not wanting to disturb them, but Garrett spotted her almost immediately. He said something to the other men and then walked over to where she stood by the fence. "Mrs. Thornton," he said, and the name sounded wrong in his mouth. "Congratulations on your marriage." "Thank you, Mr. Fletcher," Helena said, and her voice sounded hollow even to her own ears. They stood in awkward silence for a moment, and Helena could feel the tension radiating from Garrett. Finally, he said, "Are you all right?" The simple question, asked with such genuine concern, nearly broke her. Helena felt tears spring to her eyes and she blinked them back furiously. "I am fine. Just adjusting to my new circumstances." "Helena," Garrett said, dropping the formality, and his voice was rough with emotion. "I cannot stand seeing you like this. You deserve so much better than this cold arrangement." "We do not always get what we deserve, Garrett," she said, using his first name without thinking. "You know that as well as I do." "That does not make it right," he said fiercely. "You should have had a choice. You should have married for love, not out of obligation and necessity." Helena turned to face him fully, and the intensity in his eyes took her breath away. "Why do you care so much? You barely know me. I was just a job to you, a task to complete for your employer." "No," Garrett said, and he reached out as if to touch her before stopping himself and dropping his hand. "No, you were never just a job to me. From the moment I saw you in San Francisco, I knew there was something special about you. The way you carried yourself despite being terrified, the way you spoke to your mother with such love and patience, the way you faced this impossible situation with courage and grace. And then on the journey here, getting to talk with you and know you, I realized that you are one of the most remarkable women I have ever met." Helena's heart was pounding. "Garrett, you cannot say things like that. I am married now. Whatever you feel or I feel, it does not matter. It cannot matter." "I know," he said, and there was agony in his voice. "I know it is wrong and impossible, but watching you marry him today, knowing that you will be trapped in this loveless marriage, it is killing me. I should have said something sooner. I should have found a way to help you, to give you another option." "There was no other option," Helena said, and tears were running freely down her face now. "There still is no other option. My mother depends on the money from this arrangement. I cannot just walk away from my obligations." "You could if you had somewhere else to go, someone else who could provide for you and your mother." Helena stared at him, hardly daring to believe what he seemed to be suggesting. "Garrett, what are you saying?" He ran a hand through his hair, looking desperate and reckless. "I am saying that I have money saved. Not a lot, but enough to buy some land and start building a life. I am saying that I have fallen completely and hopelessly in love with you over the course of 3 days and cannot imagine spending my life without you. I am saying that if you wanted to leave Thornton, I would be honored to marry you instead and spend every day of my life trying to make you happy." Helena could not breathe. The words she had been afraid to even think, the feelings she had tried so hard to deny, were suddenly real and being offered to her like an impossible gift. But reality crashed back over her quickly. "I cannot, Garrett. I am already married. The law would not recognize any union between us, and I would be committing adultery and destroying my reputation completely. Even if I was willing to do that to myself, I cannot do it to my mother. And what about you? You would lose your job, your reputation, everything you have worked for." "I do not care about any of that," Garrett said. "I care about you." "You should care," Helena said, her voice breaking. "I care about you too much to let you destroy your life for me." They stood there, staring at each other, the truth finally spoken aloud but changing nothing. Helena felt as if her heart was being torn in two. She loved this man, she realized. Somehow, impossibly, in the space of just a few days, she had fallen deeply in love with Garrett Fletcher, and he loved her too, but they could never be together. "I should go," Helena whispered. "Mr. Thornton will be home soon, and I need to prepare dinner." "Helena, wait," Garrett said, but she was already walking away, moving as fast as she could without breaking into a run. She heard him call her name once more, but she did not turn back. She could not. The following weeks were the most miserable of Helena's life. She performed her duties as Mrs. Thornton with mechanical efficiency, managing the household and hosting the occasional dinner for her husband's business associates. Thornton treated her with distant courtesy, like a valued employee, and made no demands on her beyond the practical running of his home. He had his own bedroom and made no attempt to visit hers, for which Helena was grateful. He had told her before the wedding that he was not interested in a physical relationship, and he had been true to his word, but the loneliness was crushing. Helena had no friends in Stockton, no family nearby, no purpose beyond maintaining a house for a man who barely acknowledged her existence. And everywhere she looked, she was reminded of Garrett. She caught glimpses of him working on the ranch, heard his voice calling out to the other men, saw the places where they had talked during those 3 precious days before she became Thornton's wife. She knew he was still on the ranch. She had overheard Thornton telling one of the other hands that Fletcher was one of his best workers, and he had no intention of letting him go. So Garrett stayed, and Helena stayed, and they both suffered in silence. One evening in early November, nearly 2 months after the wedding, Thornton informed Helena that he would be traveling to Sacramento for business and would be gone for at least a week, possibly 2. He left her with a list of tasks to complete while he was away and departed the next morning without any further ceremony. Helena threw herself into work, trying to keep busy enough that she would not have time to think or feel. She supervised a thorough cleaning of the entire house, reorganized the pantry, mended curtains that did not really need mending, and generally exhausted herself with unnecessary tasks. The cook and housekeeper watched her with worried expressions, but said nothing. On the 3rd day of Thornton's absence, Helena was in the kitchen garden harvesting the last of the vegetables before the first frost when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned to find Garrett standing at the edge of the garden, his hat in his hands and his expression troubled. "Mrs. Thornton," he said formally, and the distance in his voice hurt more than Helena wanted to admit. I apologize for disturbing you, but there is a matter that requires your attention. One of the ranch dogs has had puppies and they are in the barn. Some of the men were going to drown the unwanted ones, but I thought you might want to see them first. Mr. Thornton sometimes keeps a few for working dogs. Helena set down her basket and wiped her hands on her apron. Of course. Show me. They walked to the barn in tense silence, and Helena was acutely aware of every step, every breath, every moment of being near Garrett after weeks of forced distance. He led her to a corner stall where a tired-looking dog lay nursing a litter of squirming puppies. "There are 8, Garrett said quietly. "Too many for one dog to raise properly, and too many for the ranch to keep. I thought maybe you could choose which ones to keep and I will find homes for the others, instead of letting the men drown them." Helena knelt down beside the litter, grateful for something innocent and pure to focus on. The puppies were tiny and perfect, their eyes still closed, their little tails wagging weakly. She felt tears prick at her eyes, overwhelmed by emotion she had been holding back for too long. "They are beautiful," she whispered. "Can we not keep them all?" "That would not be practical," Garrett said, and there was gentleness in his voice that made Helena's heart ache. "But we can keep 3 or 4 and find good homes for the rest. I know some families in town who would be happy to have them." Helena nodded, not trusting her voice. She reached out to gently stroke one of the puppies, and it made a tiny squeaking sound that somehow broke through all her defenses. The tears came then, silent and uncontrollable, and she could not stop them. "Helena," Garrett said, and suddenly he was kneeling beside her. "Please do not cry, I cannot bear it." "I am so unhappy," Helena sobbed, all the misery she had been holding inside pouring out at once. "I feel like I am dying a little bit every day. This is not a life, Garrett. It is just existence, just going through motions with no purpose or joy or love. I wake up every morning and wish I had not, and then I feel guilty for feeling that way when I should be grateful for having food and shelter and security." Garrett made a sound that was half groan, half curse, and then his arms were around her. Helena collapsed against him, burying her face in his shoulder and letting herself cry out all the grief and loneliness and despair she had been carrying. He held her tightly, one hand stroking her hair, murmuring soft words of comfort. "I am sorry," he kept saying. "I am so sorry. This is my fault. I should have fought harder, I should have done something." "It is not your fault," Helena said between sobs. "This is just how life is. We do not always get happy endings." "No," Garrett said fiercely, pulling back to look at her. His hands came up to cup her face, his thumbs wiping away her tears. "No, I refuse to accept that. You deserve happiness, Helena. You deserve love and joy and everything good in this world, and I am going to find a way to give that to you." "How?" Helena asked desperately. "I am married to another man. There is no way out of this that does not destroy everything." "Then maybe some things need to be destroyed," Garrett said. "Maybe your reputation and my job and this whole impossible situation need to be torn down so we can build something better in its place." "You are not thinking clearly," Helena said, but she did not pull away from his touch. "You would regret throwing away everything you have worked for." "The only thing I would regret is spending the rest of my life without you," Garrett said, and then he was kissing her. Helena knew she should pull away, knew this was wrong by every measure of society and law and morality. But she could not. She had been drowning in loneliness and despair, and Garrett's kiss was like air to her starving lungs. She kissed him back with all the pent-up longing and love she had been trying to deny, her hands clutching his shirt, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break free from her chest. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Garrett rested his forehead against hers. "Come away with me," he said. "Tonight, We will leave Stockton and go somewhere no one knows us. I have money saved. We can start over, build a new life together." "What about my mother?" Helena whispered, even though every part of her wanted to say yes. "We will send her money," Garrett said. "I will work twice as hard, save every penny. She will not suffer because of our choices." "And what about Mr. Thornton? He paid my father's debts. He fulfilled his side of the contract." "Thornton does not love you," Garrett said. "He does not want a wife, he wants a housekeeper. He will find someone else to manage his household, or he will hire staff. He will not have a broken heart, Helena. The only people whose hearts are breaking in this situation are you and me." Helena wanted to argue, wanted to find all the logical reasons why this was impossible and wrong and could never work. But she was so tired of being strong and practical and doing what was expected of her. She was tired of sacrificing her own happiness for the sake of duty and obligation. She wanted, for once in her life, to choose something for herself. "Tonight?" she asked, and her voice was trembling. "Tonight," Garrett confirmed. "Pack only what you absolutely need. I will bring horses and supplies. We will ride north toward Oregon. We can find work on a ranch up there, or I can hire on with a freight company. We will make it work, Helena, I promise you." "This is insane," Helena said, but she was starting to smile despite her tears. "We are going to ruin our lives." "Or we are going to save them," Garrett said, and he kissed her again, soft and sweet and full of promise. They made plans quickly, speaking in low voices in the corner of the barn while the mother dog watched them with patient eyes, and her puppies nursed contentedly. Garrett would finish his work for the day, and then prepare horses and supplies without raising suspicion. Helena would pack a small bag with essentials and wait for darkness. They would meet at the edge of the property, by the old oak tree that marked the boundary between Thornton's land and the open road, and they would ride away from Stockton and never look back. It was reckless and foolish and probably doomed to fail, but Helena felt more alive planning this escape than she had felt in months. She went back to the house with a sense of purpose, and for the first time since arriving at Thornton's ranch, she felt hope. The day dragged on endlessly. Helena completed her usual tasks with shaking hands, constantly afraid that someone would notice her agitation and ask questions. But the cook and housekeeper were focused on their own work, and the ranch hands were busy with their duties. No one seemed to notice anything amiss. As darkness fell, Helena changed into her most practical dress and sturdy boots. She packed a small bag with a change of clothes, her mother's locket, and the little bit of money she had managed to save from the household accounts. It was not much, but combined with Garrett's savings, it might be enough to give them a start. She left the house quietly, her heart pounding, and made her way toward the oak tree. The night was cold and clear, and the stars overhead seemed to shine with unusual brightness. Helena pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders and walked quickly, every shadow making her jump. Garrett was already waiting by the tree with 2 horses saddled and loaded with supplies. He saw her coming and stepped forward, reaching out to take her bag. "Are you sure about this?" he asked quietly. "Once we leave, there is no going back. You will be giving up security and respectability. You will be tied to a man with no property and no prospects, running from a legal marriage. Your life will be hard, Helena." "My life is already hard," Helena said firmly. "At least with you, I will have love. That is worth more than security or respectability." Garrett smiled, and even in the darkness, Helena could see the joy in his expression. "Then let us go build a life together, Mrs. Fletcher." "I am not Mrs. Fletcher," Helena said as Garrett helped her mount one of the horses. "Not legally, anyway." "You are in every way that matters," Garrett said, swinging up onto his own horse. "And someday, When enough time has passed and we are far enough away, we will make it official. I promise you that." They rode north through the night, following roads that Garrett knew well and avoiding any towns or settlements where they might be recognized. Helena felt a strange mix of fear and exhilaration. She was running away from her marriage, abandoning her duties, breaking every rule society had laid out for her. But she was also riding toward freedom and love and a chance at real happiness. They stopped before dawn to rest the horses and eat some of the provisions Garrett had packed. They were miles from Stockton now, in country that was wild and unfamiliar to Helena. Garrett built a small fire and made coffee, and they sat together watching the sky lighten in the east. "What do you think Mr. Thornton will do when he returns and finds me gone?" Helena asked. Garrett was quiet for a moment, his hands wrapped around his tin cup of coffee. "He will be angry, I imagine, not because he loves you or will miss you, but because it reflects poorly on him. His pride will be hurt. He might try to find us, or he might simply write the whole situation off as a bad investment and move on. Honestly, I think it depends on how much he wants to save face in front of his neighbors and business associates." "I left him a letter," Helena said. "I told him I was sorry for breaking the contract and that I hoped he would find someone better suited to be his wife. I tried to be honest but not cruel." "That was kind of you," Garrett said. "More than he deserved, probably." They traveled for 3 more days, always moving north, avoiding main roads when possible. Garrett was careful and cautious, making sure they were not being followed and choosing their campsites in remote locations. Helena had never been so tired in her life, her body aching from long hours in the saddle, but she did not complain. Every mile they put between themselves and Stockton was a mile closer to freedom. On the 4th day, they reached a small settlement near the California-Oregon border. It was barely more than a crossroads with a general store, a blacksmith, and a handful of houses. Garrett thought it was remote enough that no one would ask too many questions about a couple traveling together. They stopped at the general store, and Garrett spoke to the proprietor about work. The man mentioned that there was a ranch about 10 miles west that was always looking for good hands, especially ones who could break horses. The owner was a fair man who paid decent wages, and they welcomed families. "Families," the proprietor said, eyeing Helena with interest. "You folks married?" "Yes, sir," Garrett said without hesitation, taking Helena's hand. "This is my wife. We are looking to settle somewhere and start building a life." The proprietor nodded, accepting this without question. "Well, the owner's name is Thomas Gardner. Tell him Jeb sent you. He trusts my judgment on people." They found the ranch easily, and Thomas Gardner turned out to be exactly as advertised. A weathered man in his 50s who asked few questions and judged people by their skills rather than their pasts. He hired Garrett on the spot after watching him work with a difficult horse for less than 10 minutes, and he offered them a small cabin on the edge of the property. "It is not much," Gardner said, showing them the one-room cabin with its iron stove and simple furniture. "But it is clean and dry, and the roof does not leak. You are welcome to fix it up however you like. My wife might have some spare curtains and such she can give you." "It is perfect," Helena said, and she meant it. After the cold grandeur of Thornton's ranch house, this simple cabin felt like home. They settled into their new life with surprising ease. Garrett worked long hours on the ranch, and Helena took on tasks helping Gardner's wife with cooking and sewing for the ranch hands. The work was hard and the pay was modest, but they were together, and that made everything worthwhile. At night, they would sit by the fire in their small cabin, and Garrett would hold Helena close and talk about their future. He spoke about saving enough money to buy their own piece of land, about building a house with their own hands, about having children who would grow up free and loved. Helena would listen and feel her heart swell with happiness, so intense it was almost painful. They made love for the first time on a cold November night, about a month after leaving Stockton. Garrett was gentle and patient, mindful of Helena's inexperience, and the connection between them was deeper and more profound than Helena had ever imagined possible. Afterward, lying in his arms, Helena finally understood what it meant to be truly married, not in law but in spirit and heart and body. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Garrett replied, his voice rough with emotion. "More than I ever thought it was possible to love another person. You are my whole world, Helena." Winter came, harsh and cold, but the cabin was warm and their love kept them content. They heard no news from Stockton, and gradually, Helena began to relax. Perhaps Thornton had simply let her go. Perhaps he had been more relieved than angry to be free of a wife he had never wanted. Perhaps they were truly free to build their new life without fear of discovery or consequence. In January of 1883, Helena realized she was pregnant. The realization came with a mix of joy and terror. A baby would make their lives more complicated, more difficult, but Garrett was thrilled when she told him. He swept her up in his arms, spinning her around the cabin and laughing with pure happiness. "We are going to be parents," he kept saying, as if he could not quite believe it. "We are going to have a family." Helena's fears gradually gave way to excitement. She began preparing for the baby, sewing small clothes and blankets, and Mrs. Gardner was kind enough to share her knowledge and experience. The other ranch families welcomed Helena warmly, accepting her and Garrett as one of their own, and Helena felt a sense of belonging she had never experienced before. Spring brought new life to the ranch and new hope to Helena and Garrett. They had saved almost every penny of Garrett's wages, and he began looking seriously at pieces of land for sale in the area. They found a section about 20 miles north, near a creek with good water and enough flat ground for crops and grazing. It was not much, just 80 acres, but it was within their reach. Garrett negotiated with the owner, a widow who was moving east to live with her daughter, and by the end of April they had purchased the land. They owned something now, had a real stake in their future. Garrett could barely contain his excitement as he showed Helena around their property, pointing out where they would build the house, where they would plant crops, where they would keep cattle. "It will take years to build everything we want," he said, his arm around Helena's shoulders as they stood looking out over their land. "But we will do it together. We will make this into something we can be proud of, something we can pass on to our children." Helena rested her hand on her swollen belly, feeling the baby move inside her. "Our child will never have to wonder if they are loved," she said softly. "They will grow up knowing that their parents chose each other, chose them, chose this life. That is worth more than all the wealth and respectability in the world." "You are right," Garrett said, turning to pull her into his arms. "We made the right choice, Helena. Running away, starting over, building this life together. It was the right choice." In early June, Helena gave birth to a healthy baby boy. The labor was long and difficult, but Mrs. Gardner stayed with her throughout, offering comfort and guidance. When Garrett was finally allowed into the bedroom and saw his son for the first time, he wept openly. "He is perfect," Garrett whispered, gently touching the baby's tiny hand. "Absolutely perfect. What should we name him?" Helena had thought about this for months. "I want to name him James, after my father. Despite everything that happened, he did try to secure my future. He just did not know there would be a better option than William Thornton." "James Fletcher," Garrett said, testing the name. "I like it. James Fletcher, welcome to the world. Your mother and I are going to do everything we can to give you a good life." They spent the summer balancing work at Gardner's ranch with beginning to develop their own land. Garrett worked with Thomas Gardner during the day and then spent evenings and weekends clearing brush and starting to build a small house on their property. Helena helped when she could, though mostly she focused on caring for baby James and maintaining their cabin. Life was exhausting but fulfilling in ways Helena had never imagined during her time in Stockton. She was tired all the time, her hands were rough from work, and her clothes were worn and patched. But she was happy. Truly, deeply happy in a way that wealth and security had never provided. In September, more than a year after they had fled Stockton, a man arrived at Gardner's ranch asking questions about a couple matching Helena and Garrett's description. Helena's heart nearly stopped when Mrs. Gardner came to warn her, but it turned out the man was not looking to cause trouble. He was a lawyer from Sacramento, and he carried documents from William Thornton. Thornton had filed for an annulment of his marriage to Helena on the grounds of abandonment and non-consummation. The annulment had been granted by a judge in Stockton, and Thornton had paid to have the papers delivered to Helena personally. "Mr. Thornton wanted me to tell you that he bears no ill will," the lawyer said, handing Helena the documents. "He considers the matter closed and wishes you well in your new life. He has asked that you not contact him or return to Stockton, and in return, he will not pursue any legal action against you or Mr. Fletcher for breach of contract." Helena could barely believe what she was hearing. "He is truly letting me go, just like that?" "Yes, madam. Between you and me, I think he was relieved by your departure. He has since hired a housekeeper and seems quite content with the arrangement. He has no desire to drag this matter through the courts or create a scandal that would affect his business interests. The annulment was the simplest solution for everyone involved." After the lawyer left, Helena and Garrett held each other for a long time, almost unable to process what had just happened. Helena was free, legally free. The marriage to Thornton had been dissolved and she was no longer bound to him in any way. "We can get married now," Garrett said, his voice filled with wonder. "Properly married, legal and official, you can be Mrs. Fletcher for real." They were married 3 weeks later by a circuit preacher who passed through the area. It was a simple ceremony, much like Helena's first wedding had been, but the difference was like night and day. This time, Helena wore a new dress that Mrs. Gardner had helped her make, and there were wildflowers that Garrett had picked that morning. Their friends from the ranch attended, and afterward, there was a genuine celebration with food and music and laughter. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Garrett kissed Helena with such tenderness and joy that she felt tears streaming down her face. These were happy tears, though, tears of relief and gratitude and overwhelming love. "I am yours now," she whispered against his lips. "Truly and completely yours. You were always mine," Garrett replied. "From the moment I met you in San Francisco. I just had to wait for the rest of the world to catch up." They spent the next several years building their ranch and their family. Their house was completed by the following spring, a modest structure but solidly built and filled with love. Helena gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah in 1884, and another son they named Thomas after the kind rancher who had given them their start in 1886. Garrett proved to be as capable a rancher as he had been a ranch hand. Their small herd grew steadily, and his skill with horses became known throughout the region. People began seeking him out specifically when they had a difficult horse that needed training, and the extra income helped them expand their operation. Helena managed their household with the same efficiency she had once brought to Thornton's ranch, but with joy instead of duty. She taught their children to read and write, helped with the animals when Garrett needed extra hands, and maintained a vegetable garden that kept them supplied with fresh food throughout the growing season. They sent money to Helena's mother regularly, as Garrett had promised they would. Helena wrote letters explaining what had happened and where she was, and while her mother's responses were initially shocked and disappointed, gradually they became more accepting. Eventually, when James was 3 years old, Helena's mother came to visit and met her grandchildren for the first time. She saw how happy Helena was, how much Garrett loved her, and she gave them her blessing. "I was wrong to push you into that marriage with Mr. Thornton," her mother said on the last day of her visit. "I thought security was the most important thing, but I see now that love matters more. You made the right choice, my darling girl, even though it was the harder one." In 1890, 8 years after that fateful journey from San Francisco to Stockton, Helena and Garrett sat on the porch of their ranch house watching their 3 children play in the yard. Sarah was teaching James how to braid wildflowers while young Thomas toddled around chasing chickens. The sun was setting over their land, painting everything golden and beautiful. "You ever regret it?" Helena asked, leaning against Garrett's shoulder. "Running away with me, giving up the security of regular wages to take a chance on this life." Garrett wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. "Not for a single second. This life, this family, this is everything I ever wanted. I would make the same choice 1,000 times over." Even though it was hard, even though we struggled and worked ourselves half to death that first year, especially because of that, Garrett said. "We built this together, Helena. Every fence post, every building, every decision. This is ours in a way that nothing else could ever be. And I get to wake up every morning next to the woman I love, watching our children grow, building a legacy that will last long after we are gone. How could I possibly regret that?" Helena tilted her face up to kiss him, still feeling that flutter in her stomach that his touch always inspired. "I love you, Garrett Fletcher. Thank you for being brave enough to tell me how you felt that day in the barn. Thank you for giving me a chance at real happiness." "Thank you for being brave enough to choose it," Garrett replied. "Not everyone would have had the courage to walk away from security and respectability for the unknown. But you did, and that made all the difference." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Helena thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. She thought about the frightened young woman who had climbed into a wagon beside a stranger, heading toward a marriage she did not want with a man she had never met. She thought about the cowboy who had driven her there, who had seen something in her worth fighting for, worth risking everything for. That journey had changed everything. It had taken her from despair to hope, from obligation to choice, from loneliness to love. The road had been difficult and uncertain, but every hard step had been worth it to arrive at this place, with this man, raising these children on land they owned together. Their story was not the story that had been planned for her. It was not the safe, respectable life of Mrs. William Thornton, managing a wealthy rancher's household and living in comfortable emptiness. Instead, it was the story of Helena and Garrett Fletcher, 2 people who had chosen love over security, courage over comfort, and had built something real and lasting from that choice. In the years that followed, their ranch continued to prosper. Garrett's reputation as a horse trainer spread far enough that people would travel from as far as Oregon and Nevada to have him work with their animals. Helena expanded her vegetable garden into a small but productive orchard, and her preserves became sought after at the local markets. James grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved books and learning. Sarah was bold and adventurous, always the first to try something new and never afraid of hard work. Thomas was gentle and kind, with a natural way with animals that reminded Helena of his father. Watching them grow and develop their own personalities was one of Helena's greatest joys. In 1893, Helena gave birth to their fourth child, another daughter they named Margaret. By then, James was 10 and already helping his father with the horses, and Sarah was 9 and determined to learn everything her older brother knew. Thomas was 7 and content to follow his siblings around, soaking up knowledge and experiences. The ranch had grown to over 200 acres by then, purchased piece by piece as they saved money and expanded their operation. They had a proper barn, several outbuildings, and a herd of cattle that numbered nearly 100 head. It was not a vast empire like some of the big ranches in the valley, but it was solid and sustainable, and it was entirely theirs. One evening in the summer of 1895, as they were finishing dinner, James asked a question that Helena had been expecting for years, but had never quite known how to answer. He was 13 now, observant and curious about everything. "Father, Mother," he said carefully, "I was in town last week with the gardeners, and I heard some men talking about a rancher in Stockton named Thornton. They said his wife ran off years ago with one of his ranch hands. They made it sound like a scandal, like something shameful. But then Mr. Gardner got angry and told them they did not know what they were talking about, and he made me leave before I could hear more." "What were they talking about?" Helena and Garrett exchanged glances. They had always planned to tell their children the truth when they were old enough to understand, but the moment had arrived more suddenly than expected. Garrett set down his fork and looked at his son seriously. "That rancher was William Thornton, and that wife was your mother. And yes, she left him to be with me. But the story those men were telling, the shameful scandal version, that is not the truth of what happened." Over the next hour, Helena and Garrett told their children the full story. They explained about Helena's father's death and the marriage contract, about the journey from San Francisco to Stockton, about falling in love during those 3 days, but believing they could never be together. They explained about the loveless marriage to Thornton, about the desperate decision to run away together, about the fear and uncertainty and ultimate joy of building their life together. The children listened with wide eyes, occasionally asking questions, and when the story was finished, Sarah spoke first. "That is the most romantic thing I have ever heard," she declared. "You chose each other even though it was hard and scary. That is what real love is supposed to be." James looked thoughtful. "But you broke a legal marriage contract. Technically, what you did was wrong by the law." "Yes," Garrett agreed. "Technically, we did break the law and societal expectations, but sometimes laws and expectations are unjust. Your mother was treated like property to be bought and sold, without any say in her own future. Walking away from that situation was the right thing to do, even if it was not the legal thing to do." "And Mr. Thornton," Thomas asked quietly, "was he angry?" "At first, probably," Helena said. "But eventually, he had our marriage annulled and let us go. I think, in his own way, he understood that we did not belong together. He wanted a housekeeper, not a wife, and I wanted a partner, not an employer. We were both better off apart." Margaret, who was only 2 and had been playing with a rag doll during the conversation, looked up and said, "Love." Everyone laughed, the tension breaking, and Garrett scooped up his youngest daughter. "Yes, sweetheart, love. That is what this whole complicated story is really about. Love is worth fighting for, worth sacrificing for, worth taking risks for. And I hope all of you remember that when you are grown and making your own choices about who you want to spend your lives with." As the children grew older and began their own lives, Helena and Garrett watched with pride and sometimes bittersweet nostalgia. James went to college in San Francisco, determined to become a lawyer who could help people trapped in unjust contracts like the one that had bound his mother. Sarah married a rancher's son from a neighboring property, and together they built their own successful operation. Thomas stayed on the family ranch, taking over more and more responsibilities as Garrett's back began to trouble him in his middle age. Margaret, spirited and independent like her mother, became a teacher in the growing town of Redding. In 1910, nearly 30 years after Helena and Garrett had first met, they celebrated their silver wedding anniversary. Of course, they had actually been together for 28 years, but they counted from the day they were legally married by the circuit preacher. All 4 children came home for the celebration, along with their own spouses and children, and the ranch house was filled with noise and laughter and love. That evening, after everyone else had gone to bed, Helena and Garrett sat together on the porch just as they had so many times over the years. They were in their 50s now, their hair showing gray and their faces lined with years of hard work and sun exposure. But Garrett still looked at Helena with the same love and devotion he had shown that day in the barn when he first told her how he felt. "What are you thinking about?" Garrett asked, taking her hand in his. "About that telegram," Helena said. "The one that arrived in San Francisco in 1882, telling me to prepare to marry a man I had never met. At the time, I thought it was the worst thing that had ever happened to me. But now I see that it was actually the beginning of the best thing. If I had not received that telegram, if you had not been sent to fetch me, we never would have met. Our children would not exist. This life we have built would not exist. Fate works in mysterious ways," Garrett said. "Or maybe it is not fate at all. Maybe it is just about choices and courage. We chose each other when we could have chosen safety. We chose love when we could have chosen security. And every day since then, we have kept choosing each other." "I would choose you again," Helena said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "Every single time, in every possible version of that story, I would choose you." "And I would choose you," Garrett replied, kissing the top of her head. "My brave, beautiful Helena." The woman who was promised to a man she had never met, but chose the cowboy who drove her there instead. Best decision either of us ever made. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars come out over their land, surrounded by the legacy they had built together. The journey that had begun with fear and obligation had led to love and freedom, and everything that had come after was proof that sometimes the hardest choices are the ones most worth making. Years continued to pass, bringing the changes that time always brings. Garrett's hair turned completely silver, and his hands, once so strong and capable with horses, began to show the tremors of age. Helena's eyes weakened, requiring glasses for reading and sewing, and her joints ached on cold mornings. But they aged together, supporting each other through every difficulty, celebrating every joy. In 1918, as the Great War finally ended and the world began to recover, Helena and Garrett became great-grandparents for the first time when Sarah's daughter gave birth to a son. They held the tiny baby and marveled at how far their family tree had extended from that desperate flight from Stockton so many decades ago. 4 children, 12 grandchildren, and now a great-grandchild, Helena said softly, cradling the infant. "All because we had the courage to choose each other. And all of them free to make their own choices about who they love and how they live," Garrett added. "That is the real legacy, I think. Not the land or the money we will leave behind, but the example that love and courage matter more than security and obligation." Thomas had taken over full management of the ranch by then, running it with his father's skill and his mother's organizational abilities. He and his wife had expanded the operation even further, and the Fletcher Ranch was now one of the most respected in the region. It was known not just for quality cattle and horses, but for treating workers fairly and being generous neighbors in times of trouble. In the spring of 1925, Garrett's health began to fail seriously. He had always been strong and vital, but at 68, his body finally began to give out. He spent more and more time sitting on the porch, watching the ranch operate around him, and Helena rarely left his side. One warm May evening, as the sun set over the mountains, Garrett took Helena's hand and said, "I am ready, you know. I have had a good life. Better than I ever dreamed possible when I was a young ranch hand with nothing but hope and determination. I have loved you for more than 40 years, raised 4 amazing children, and built something lasting. I am at peace with whatever comes next." Helena felt tears stream down her face, but she smiled through them. "You are not allowed to leave me yet, Garrett Fletcher. We have been together too long for me to know how to exist without you." "You are the strongest woman I have ever known," Garrett said, his voice weak but filled with love. "You survived leaving everything you knew, building a life from nothing, raising children in harsh conditions, and you did it all with grace and courage. You will survive this too, and our children and grandchildren will take care of you. You will never be alone." "But I will be without you," Helena whispered, "and that is a loneliness I do not know how to bear." "You will bear it because you must," Garrett said gently. "Just like you bore everything else life threw at you, and you will find joy again because you always do. Promise me you will keep living, Helena. Really living, not just existing. Promise me." "I promise," Helena said, though the words felt like they were tearing her heart in two. Garrett died 3 days later, peacefully in his sleep with Helena holding his hand. The funeral was attended by more than 100 people, testament to how respected he had become in the community. Helena stood beside her children and grandchildren, accepting condolences with quiet dignity, and tried to remember how to breathe in a world without Garrett Fletcher in it. The months that followed were the hardest of Helena's life. She had faced poverty, fear, uncertainty, and hardship, but she had always faced them with Garrett beside her. Learning to navigate life without him felt impossible at first. She would wake up reaching for him, would turn to tell him something and remember he was not there, would sit on the porch in the evening and feel his absence like a physical wound. But she had made him a promise, and she intended to keep it. Slowly, painfully, Helena learned to live again rather than just exist. She spent time with her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, telling them stories about their grandfather and the life they had built together. She continued to tend her garden, to preserve fruit, to maintain the household routines that had structured her days for decades. And she found comfort in knowing that their story, the story of the woman who was promised to a man she had never met and the cowboy who drove her there, had become something of a legend in their family. It was told at gatherings, used to illustrate points about courage and love and standing up for what you believe in. It had become part of the family identity, a reminder that happiness is worth fighting for. Helena lived for another 12 years after Garrett's death, reaching the remarkable age of 77. She remained sharp and engaged until the very end, surrounded by family who loved her and honored the choices she and Garrett had made so many years ago. When she died peacefully in her sleep in the spring of 1937, she was buried beside Garrett on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together. Their graves were marked with simple stones that bore their names, their dates, and a single line that Thomas had insisted on adding. They chose love. The ranch remained in the Fletcher family for generations after, passed down from Thomas to his children and then to their children. The house that Garrett and Helena had built together still stood, expanded and modernized over the years, but retaining its essential character. The family gathered there for holidays and celebrations, and the story of Helena and Garrett was told to each new generation. And in the early evening, when the sun set over the mountains and painted everything gold, if you sat very quietly on that old porch, you could almost feel their presence. The woman who had found the courage to choose love over security, and the man who had loved her enough to risk everything. Their story had become legend, but the love that inspired it was real and lasting, echoing through the years and reminding everyone who heard it that sometimes the hardest choices are the ones that matter most. The telegram that arrived in September of 1882 had set in motion a chain of events that changed not just two lives, but shaped an entire family legacy. What began as a journey to an unwanted marriage became instead a journey to true love, to freedom, to a life built on choice and courage rather than obligation and security. Helena had been promised to a man she had never met, but the cowboy who drove her there fell in love instead. And in choosing to love him back, in choosing to run away and build a new life together, Helena and Garrett had proven that sometimes the greatest act of courage is simply allowing yourself to be happy. Their story was one of risk and reward, of fear overcome by love, of two people who refused to accept the fate that had been assigned to them and instead wrote their own ending. It was a story worth telling, worth remembering, worth passing down through the generations. Because it was not just their story. It was a reminder that love is always worth fighting for, that happiness is always worth risking security for, and that the best life is one you choose for yourself rather than one that is chosen for you. And so the Fletcher family continued on, generation after generation, carrying with them the legacy of Helena and Garrett, the woman and the cowboy who dared to choose love and built something beautiful from that choice. Their ranch still stood, their descendants still prospered, and their story lived on as proof that sometimes the most important journey is not the one you plan, but the one you dare to take when love gives you the courage to change your destination.